Born and raised in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, graduated of College High School and then the Oklahoma State University with a degree in geology. During his professional career, he worked as a farrier, a small engine mechanic, a geologist, a Navy fighter pilot, commercial airline pilot, and an entrepreneur. In 2006, Brurud founded Check 6 International, an efficiency and safety consulting firm that implements the best practices for aircraft carrier operations, special operations, and space to improve efficiency in high hazard and dangerous operations. Check 6 is a disabled veteran-owned company comprised of an elite group of unique military leadership specialists. Brurud is a former U.S. Navy Top Gun fighter pilot that survived 436 carrier aircraft landings, 99 combat missions, 17 surface-to-air missile attacks, and 1 aircraft ejection. He's one of the highest decorated naval aviators since the Vietnam War. His decorations include the Bronze Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Silver Star. And he's the focus subject of the book Black Aces High by Robert Wilcox, depicting a modern fighter squadron of war. Please join me in welcoming Brurud this morning.
Well, now in a long line of squids that are going to get up here and talk to you about nuclear and carrier aviation type of stuff. Thanks, sister. I really appreciate that.
You weren't supposed to let that part out. No call sign.
No call sign, sorry. What I will share with you, and all humility aside for my shipmates that have preceded me on this stage up here, for those that have gone through nuclear power school, it can probably only be described as by those that go through nuclear power school. It's one of those things that is beyond my capacity or ability to even think about going through the training that was required for those people to get 6,200 reactor hours incident-free. I mean, that is a Herculean accomplishment, and much of what I'm going to share with you, much more from a lower echelon, because while these guys are artisans in what they do, I'm more of a ditch digger type thing on that. And with that, I'll explain to you a little bit. All of these accomplishments up here was a gift, and it was a gift from the taxpayers of this country. And they did it without regard to background or anything else. They must not have, because my core competency is in this. I'm a horseshoer from Oklahoma and a ranch kid. And my life experience that I'm going to share with you a little bit on the topic we have before us, my life expectation was not to be here talking to you today about a crazy experience that took up my professional life, the first part of it. The other thing I'm good at is digging ditches, but I'm not very good at the plumbing aspect that goes along with it. So I figured that wasn't a way to go. And so this was a much more wonderful life experience for me. But I will tell you that my experience has been one of coming from incredible ignorance with a little bit of self-confidence that my folks gave me, and then was listened a lot more than I spoke, and took the best practices from everybody around me, and many of them are in this room. And they were junior to me in a lot of cases. So with that being said, I just want to share with you what we're going to talk about. Operations excellence, and it's living operations excellence, to give you that type of perspective. Much of what's been said before, it was well covered there, and I'm not going to try and improve on that professionalism in content or delivery, but I'm going to tell you what it looks like and what it feels like. Because once you have that feeling, and it's one in which you're the best in the world, it's almost an addiction, because you always want to go back to it. There's a sense of accomplishment that comes from leading and being a part of teams where the background is, you know there's going to be human failure, but you trap it and you control it, and there's no operational consequence to it, or if there is, it's minimal and manageable. The other thing is operational excellence, how to get it. But once you're there, there's only one way to go, and it's the other way around, and keeping it is the most difficult part. Probably could ask Tom Brady that, you know, for his miraculous comeback and so forth, but keeping that is as Herculean as the win they had in the Super Bowl this year. And then there's the expected results, because at the end of the day, it's a a very valiant effort to go and seek operational excellence. It does come at a cost, but measured against what? And the explanation of the Macondo incident and others are certainly appropriate in that. So with that being said, we have a company called Check 6. Those of you that are not Navy people, which is this table right over here, any idea what the term Check 6 means? Or we can all say it together. It's a clock code. In front of you is your 12 o'clock, behind you is your 6 o'clock. And in aviation, we learned early on that it's what you don't see that ends up killing you, whether it's the hazards, and in some cases it's missiles that come up to you. And so it's an actual term that we use flying called Check 6, and it's a reminder, because I had a flight instructor one time that gave me a very valuable pearl of wisdom, and he said, "Hey son, I realize you deal with farm animals, but if your mouth will say it, your butt will follow." And it's weird how you get up there and you say, "Check 6," and all of a sudden your head turns and checks the 6 o'clock and clears the back end of an airplane from somebody, and you know that they are doing that for you as well. It's a responsibility and a professional obligation. And so that is what Check 6 is. Now, and that's what we named the company, because in my case, I had the fortune and misfortune of being shot at 17 times by surface-to-air missiles. And when that became the new normal, I was thinking, my good day became the day I wasn't being shot at, and it was very appropriate, but that's what kept me alive. It wasn't chance, it was a part of the plan. And part of that was a division of labor and responsibility, where when I was in a high threat exposed area, the limitation we had in our own little airplane was the bigger world, because our world got very small in the sensors that we were managing, manipulating, and trying to deal with. But a part of the greater plan was an oversight and mutual support from a wingman and others, that when something bad happened, they told me of the hazard. And that's why we named our company Check 6. Because out of those 17 missiles, anybody have any idea how many of them I was the first one to see them? 0. Exactly. So, aircraft carriers, let me give you a perspective. An amazing piece of technology, almost as neat as a submarine. But and that's the first thing you see when you go out to one. It's massive. Amazing technology, catapults that take tons of airplanes and throw them off the front of a ship at 150 miles an hour. And then you can land aircraft day, night, all weather coming in on this thing. The airplanes talk to satellites, so does the ship. I mean, it's an amazing piece of technology. But very rapidly, when you see one in operation, the choreographed chaos that goes on is ridiculous. And to the uninformed eye, when you look at it, you're going, how does this choreographed chaos actually work? And that's when you get it. It's the people that makes the technology sing, not the other way around. Because you can fail one of these organizations by just one human mistake. And we'll talk about more of that here in a little bit. But the operational excellence that you're being measured by is this: launch 4 airplanes in a minute. Recover airplanes during the day, 45 seconds between them. At night, we get an extra 15 seconds. Woohoo. You know what night carrier landings do for you? 2 things. They give you religion, because at certain nights you will pray to anything that will get you aboard that thing alive. But it also makes you the biggest sinner, because at the moment you're praying to God or whoever you pray to and making promises, you know very well you can't keep any of them. And so you land and, you get religion and you give God a lot to work with. But I want you to look at this thing. You know how many people are on these things? Something short of 5,000 people. Any idea what the average age is? About 21. So a carrier deploys for 6 months, 6 to 9 months, comes back for 12 to 18 months, and then deploys again. Any idea what the turnover is? About 85%. So you constantly have people that are trained up going out the door and people that know nothing coming in. And you're always, always training. And more on that training overhead here in a second. But for those of you that get an opportunity, take the opportunity to visit your aircraft carriers out there. Call the Navy up, say you want to see it, they'll give you a tour of the thing, because you own it, quite frankly. And but look at all this that's going on out here. It's so loud up there, and very few people actually have radios. But it's so loud, it's nonverbal communication that takes place. And there can be no misunderstandings. And you have jet blasts that are sweeping back and forth that can throw you off the side of this thing. So checking each other's 6 o'clock, not just in the air, but on the ground is what's really important. Now they make movies about the flying aspect of this stuff, but the real heroes of this thing are in the front lines, up on that flight deck, and everybody else that supports that. Because if you don't have it, you don't have a movie. And Top Gun, that movie, there's really only, anybody not seen it? There's only 2 things about that movie that are true. One, they do fly airplanes there, and the other one, maybe there's just only one thing. So it's, but all the rest of it is complete Hollywood in there. We don't take showers, we take showers, but we don't do it after we fly all the time. We go right to the club. So what's the other, what's the other analogy for operational excellence that we can look at? Well, this right here is a short thing. These are all the flights, all the little ant stand that's running around up there are flights. And at nighttime, that's FedEx and UPS. They're going across the pond there. But there's about 87,000 flights a day that go on. And if 99.99% was good enough, we'd have, every other day, we'd have a major aircraft mishap. So there's something good about that system that's working. And a lot of that was borrowed from military aviation. But here's the other thing. With the performance they have right now, the operational excellence of commercial aviation, they're at 7 sigma. Take that decimal 9 all the way out to 7 spots. That's what you've got up there. So, and that's something to be quite prideful of. And I'm quite proud of being a part of that. But it wasn't always that way. And most evolutions of systems that reach that level of precision, they don't start off that way. And in this case, the Navy had a very rude awakening on July 27th, or July 29th, 1967. Gulf of Tonkin, North Vietnam, 3 days prior, the USS Forrestal pulled up there. And I'm telling you, combat operations is hot, manly work, men doing manly things. That was the culture. So maybe we could take some latitude for the morale of the ship, not let them wear their PPE, bare shirts, bare chests, suntans, launching airplanes, combat missions. Well, watch this little clip. The video is poor, but you'll get the idea. But this was when the Navy realized the culture we had and the cost of doing business was way too high and something needed to change.
On deck, somehow a zoomy rocket has been triggered, roaring across the flight deck and hitting an A4 skyhawk. Flame from the A4's ruptured fuel tank has enveloped the Skyhawk and her immediate neighbors. Behind that curtain of smoke, 2 1,000-pound bombs have already dropped from her wings onto the burning deck. Here, almost at mid-screen, we see a crash crew chief moving toward the flames with a Purple K fire extinguisher. His only thought, the trapped pilots in those planes. Away, 2 main fire parties are now on deck working close to the flames. But so far, only one hose is actually operating. right. Her courage hemmed on like a badge. Following the third explosion, the first two fire parties had been virtually wiped out. The fire was now completely out of control. The great ship was on the verge of dying. To save her, other men were going to have to go back on deck, most of them without sufficient training in firefighting techniques. Outside, the only hope was that the explosions would somehow subside. Until they did, no firefighting team could possibly survive on deck. In all, during the fire's first 5 minutes, 9 major explosions took place on the plane. It was already forming up. They knew what they needed most on deck, the phone booth. For some unknown reason, one or more of them know that it was necessary to perform certain manual functions on the flight deck and hangar decks to get them and the forestall pilots. Once this buffer zone was established, some of the damaged planes could be moved to safety. Along the port side, where most of the armed aircraft were parked, things were still out of control.
About 10 years later, the worst commercial aviation disaster took place in Tenerife. You had two 747s that flew into each other. The basic root cause is very similar between both of these. Dealt with culture and the communication part of the leadership breakdown that ended up occurring on this stuff. But these were milestone evolutions that caused change. And change is difficult when it's not instituted by some catastrophic event. But that's the history of naval and commercial aviation. It all happened in the early part of the 70s and in the 60s was when the wake-up call occurred for us on that. But we learned from that. And the interesting part with like myself and my other shipmates that are here today is we lived a part of that entire evolution. The evolution other industries right now are wanting to do and acquire the same thing, we lived it. And we understand exactly all the critical components of it. And the three cornerstones you have on that have been addressed earlier. It's leadership, it's processes and procedures, and then it's the work culture under which everybody operates. And when all three of those are in gear, you're on the path or you have a high reliability organization. It's a people system though. And leadership isn't consistent when you do have turnover and so forth, different styles and whatnot. And so if you have two of the three of these, it actually acts as a control to help the third part of it so that it's workable. Because a less than perfect leader can be compensated by a strong work culture of subordinates that pick up the slack and then can rest against sound processes and procedures on it. And every one of these can be handled. If you've got strong leadership and good team culture, then your operational processes don't have to be perfect because their planning ends up being a lot better. And they work at it, their time to plan takes a little bit longer, but it's functional and it can be safely managed. The cultural part, on the other hand, is a tough nut to crack. But if you have strong leadership and some sound processes going together, but these are the three essential elements that have to be tackled either sequentially or simultaneously on your journey to become an OE company. Now the other part of it, the fiddle that you play within that, is what we call the plan-based execution cycle. This is the blocking and tackling, folks. It's the fundamentals. And from the world I've lived in, if you can have the greatest policies, you can have the greatest procedures, but this fundamental tenet of all hands has to be mastered or you have nothing. And it's quite simple, and I'd be willing to bet everyone in here has a management system that says this. You plan your work if you want a predictable outcome. You brief your work so that everybody knows what their role is and what the objective is. You execute your work, and in a HRO, there's three components: cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. All three are critical elements of that. And the most underutilized and most important part of it And the part that fills the gap between the 80% failure rate of Lean Six Sigma or other change initiatives is a frontline feedback loop. And we call it the debrief or after action review. And all of these things together are done multiple times a day with every activity. Something as simple as a smoke break. You can condition a culture so that everybody goes through this mentally when they go to conduct an activity. But here's my question, because I know y'all are looking at me and going, yeah, that ditch digger part, that's pretty much right on the spot there, Brurud. And what you're telling us here, what third grade teacher gave you that pearl of wisdom? Well, I didn't come up with it, but mastery of that has such a big bang for the buck. And here's my question to you. What are the components of a plan? And those of you in the workshop yesterday just worked with me on this. But what are the components of a plan? Moreover, here's the bigger question. Do you think everybody in this room, if you wrote down what the components of a plan are, do you think we would all write down the same thing? So something as fundamental as the components of a plan, if everybody in an activity is not aligned on that one fundamental concept, how do you know if you have one? If somebody says they have a plan, you bet we're operating off of the plan. Well, how do you know? If that simple fact isn't standardized, and that was a big lesson learned that came out of Navy operations, specifically 1981, but more on that later. But all of this applies policies, procedures, and management system in the course of this continuous improvement loop. But when we get down here to the plan, this is what we define them as. Now, there's sub-elements to it, but there's 5 steps to it. What's the objective? What are the resources I have available? What are the steps? Who's doing what with what to accomplish what? Is it sequentially? Is it in parallel? But it's only after that that you can do a valid risk assessment. What comes out of a risk assessment? Either stopping the job or contingency plan so you can safely move forward if a contingency manifests itself. And because it's so critical, an element of that plan is when and where and who's going to be at a debrief when you're done, because you can't afford, much like Bob told earlier, you can't afford to let a training opportunity pass. So in the course of business, you have to learn and train from every single activity of it. And that's operations discipline that comes from leadership, not just the managers, but leadership innate to everybody on the team. Because it takes a pair to stand up if you don't know what you're doing. You're a new hire coming in, and you're observing more than you're talking, and you want to stop a job, you want to shut down production of a refinery, you want to shut down a pipeline that you know, you want to disconnect an ECD blowout preventer that went and they call it the $1 million button. What does that do to human performance that you know you just spent $1 million when you punch a button? So who punches a button? Not many people, unless you practice it. But let's put this in perspective, because this is what we see a lot when it comes to planning. And it manifests itself in the execution. Who wants to see it again? So from a planning perspective, what was his objective? Brand the horse, you bet. Let's go and do that. I'm always getting back to barnyard animals. What's that all about? Resources, what do you have? Well, you have the objective, which is the horse to get branded. He's got a hot poker and a guy crazy enough to hold on to a hot poker. He walks up there and does that. So those were the resources and steps. Was there a step number 4, the risk assessment? No. So did he have a plan? No, he had good intentions. Man, by God, I'm just going to go brand me a horse today. And then, have that happen to him. So, and then there's the other parts of this thing. The objective, clear, measurable, attainable, a leadership responsibility. And it sounds simple, but let's look at this case study. This is my family at Thanksgiving dinner, after dinner actually. So from a planning standpoint, the objective, if we were to say the objective again somehow, what would we say? Just turn the truck over and hold on to it, stop it, do something so it doesn't just go over the side of the cliff. Sounds like something simple, but we see this all the time. And it happens with frontline personnel operating with great intentions and a can-do attitude. These other parts, resources, tools, people, technology, information, standard operating procedure, work instructions, best practices, all of those things go into an inventory of planning on what you can use. And sometimes it's not tools, it's information. The other part of that is steps, bite-sized elements. Do that plan, brief, execute, debrief a number of times for bigger projects, because all of them have a mobilization phase, an execution phase, and then a demobilization phase. Good rules of thumb on doing it, breaking it up that way. And then you come to risk assessment. And that's when we get into the fidelity of understanding human factors. And that's a whole topic unto itself that ends up being mastered by leadership and everybody within a high reliability organization. Because if there's something that's going to fail, what's it going to be? It's the human. And an airline, in the course of aviation, a cockpit crew on a typical flight will make anywhere from 3 to 5 mistakes each. But they're trapped by utilizing this system we just talked about in the execution of cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. FedEx is an interesting model because their training includes 3 days of human factors training. And then it's recurrent training as well. But at FedEx, everybody flies at night. And we're not night creatures. So just the fact that you have 4,000 pilots every night that might as well be legally intoxicated because they're functionally degraded to 50% just because they're working at night. It takes a week to get acclimated. By that time, they're done with the trip. So Fred Smith, how he manages that is miraculous. And their training program and other commercial training programs are equally as impressive. But you want to eliminate the hazard, mitigate it, or control it, and stop work authority. Probably executing stop work authority is one of the single greatest leadership challenges of anybody, regardless of what their rank is, because if you're a new person, you're going to be afraid to speak up. And if you're an old person, you're comfortable in the environment you're in, however hazardous it may be. But stop work needs to be a defined term in the plan. These are the conditions under which we will stop work. And one of them, and the most evolved one, is going, if we deviate from our plan, we're stopping it. And we're going to debrief it, incorporate those lessons learned, modify the plan, brief it, and then move on again. And then the last most important part is the debrief. Why do we do a debrief? Continuous frontline feedback that can do what? It can be a feedback mechanism to leadership or on leadership skills. It can be input from the front line of saying, hey, these policies and procedures, most of which, yeah, we know we have them, but we don't use them. It helps him, well, we have them, we're supposed to have them, so if we have them, we might as well use them. So if they're not satisfactory, let's fix them. But if there's not a debrief component in the culture in order to feed that, no change happens. And everybody sits there, much like Matt was talking about the power generation plant yesterday. He had 40 years of normalized deviance going on there, that nobody used the tools they had at hand because, probably poorly led until he showed up. So, and then there's cultural and language considerations with the team that you're in. I mean, aircraft carriers are the most diverse population on the planet, both in ethnicity, religious values, backgrounds, and all that sort of stuff. And Bob said it quite well, I mean, you have to deal with a lot of problems with an average crew force of 21. So you have to understand the cultural changes so you don't have this happen.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät, das Überlebensradar.
Hello? This is is the German Coast Guard.
We're thinking.
What are you thinking about?
I like that. How's that for knowledge transfer? God, you got it. So the debrief flow, it's the same. It's the same as the planning flow, almost. Objective, did we meet it, yes or no? Did we use the right resources? The steps, risk contingency plans, you just use the same process, but you go through all of it. And then the execution piece of this, or wait a second, that was the briefing flow. See, that thing about if your mouth says it, your butt will follow? On the briefing part of it, it's the same when you go to tell the story about what you're doing. Here's the objective, we've got this widget, we've got this crew, and this is how we're dividing the labor up to accomplish this overall objective. Here's the risks that we got. Anybody got anything for me? All right, we're gonna debrief it right after with the crew right here behind the shack, and we'll debrief it, move on, next task. Execution, cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. That's what saved my life more times than not. Bob used some other terms for the same thing, but it's basically somebody speaking up that's got your back. And like he said, it saved my life. I know it saved his and his crew as well. And the oversight function. Somebody that is not directly involved emotionally or otherwise with the activity, but they provide a greater awareness of the world around them. And then there's the debrief. You know, what's this about? Why do you do a debrief? Knowledge transfer, as we talked about. Best practice capture. And then so we can disseminate that, not only for the benefit of the team, but for those that are around them. And then what it's not. It's about what we either want to replicate or it's what we don't want to do again. It's not about who did it. And that is a remarkable distinction, because when you go to set a debrief culture, there can't be finger pointing, blaming, insecurity, or those types of things. And that's a tall order. And it takes remarkable leadership to walk in, be in a senior position, and admit that you could have done something better. But once you get the ego parked in the corner, God, it works really well. Change happens rapidly. That feedback is incorporated more succinctly, and the results reflect that. And the tone of the meeting is so vitally important for that very reason. And the debrief outflow, it's just 6 simple steps. Was the objective met, yes or no? That takes 4 seconds. The input for planning, and these are for leadership development as well, in the course of doing your business, because it's not only for the leader that plans it or briefs it, but that can be delegated as a grooming and mentoring tool in order to bring subordinates up to a higher level of performance and knowledge.